The snow had fallen in thick, silent sheets over Margaret's front lawn, softening the world outside to a hush. Her living room glowed warmly with the flicker of candlelight and the crackle of the fireplace, the tree dressed in gold and crimson ornaments that shimmered like old memories. The scent of rosemary and honey ham floated through the air, blending with the cinnamon notes of her mulled cider. Margaret stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, wiping her hands on a dish towel as David and Emily stepped inside, brushing snow from their coats. She offered a polite smile. "You made it," she said. Her voice was even, not cold, but not the eager warmth it once held. David leaned in to kiss her cheek, his eyes already scanning the dining room. "Looks beautiful, Mom." Emily followed, her faux fur collar framing her glossy smile. "You've outdone yourself again. It's so quaint." Margaret didn't miss the pause before the compliment. They sat. China clinked. Conversation buzzed lightly. Weather, travel, Sophie's latest piano recital. Margaret let them settle in, waiting for the right moment, the one where comfort and false goodwill made people careless. It came over dessert. As Emily dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin and David refilled his wine glass, Margaret placed her fork down deliberately. Her fingers touched the edge of a red leather folder resting on the sideboard. "I noticed something odd last week," she began casually, lifting the folder and setting it beside her plate. "In my bank statements, a few transactions I don't remember making." Emily glanced up, too quickly. "Oh?" Her voice was light, airy. "Happens all the time, doesn't it? Banks mislabel things, algorithms or whatever." Margaret opened the folder with a quiet, unhurried motion. She withdrew a printed statement and slid it across the table toward David. Except these weren't just mislabeled, they were transfers to an account under the name E. Harris. David's brow furrowed. "What? Are you sure?" Emily gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Margaret, come on. That could be anyone." "I checked with the bank," Margaret said. "Chloe Reed confirmed the account details." The room fell still. Only the fire cracked. Emily's eyes flickered, not with panic, but calculation. She reached for her wine glass, took a sip, and leaned back in her chair, legs crossed at the ankle. "I think you're mistaken," she said smoothly. "Maybe you're misremembering. Things get muddled at a certain age." David winced slightly, but said nothing. Margaret leaned forward, voice steady. "Don't patronize me. I taught math for 37 years. I don't muddle numbers." Emily held her smile, but her jaw tightened. "Why would I steal from you?" she asked. "What on earth would I even need from your accounts?" "Maybe to cover some of your image expenses," Margaret said quietly. "Designer bags. Brand partnerships. I've seen your posts." David cut in, his tone suddenly sharp with discomfort. "Mom, this is... Look, I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Maybe Chloe made a mistake." "She didn't," Margaret replied. Emily's veneer began to slip, a fine crack running through her voice. "Are you accusing me of theft on Christmas Eve?" "I'm stating a fact," Margaret said. "I didn't invite you here for cheer. I invited you for truth." David stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Mom, could you not do this tonight? Can't we enjoy one normal holiday?" Margaret turned to him, eyes unreadable. "You think this is normal?" Emily rose too, her expression now openly hostile. "You're paranoid. This is sad." Margaret didn't flinch. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm, and began clearing the table. "I'll have Rachel contact you both with the formal papers after the holidays," she said. David blinked. "What papers?" Margaret paused, her back to them. "You'll see." Behind her, the tension snapped like a brittle branch. Emily's voice was tight with rage. "You're going to regret this." Margaret turned, her expression a portrait of icy composure. "No," she said. "You will?" As she carried the dishes into the kitchen, she didn't look back. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, as if the house itself had heard the truth at last. The wind had died down by morning, leaving the world glazed in silence and glass. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee gone cold, as if her fingers hadn't yet realized she was done drinking. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where fresh snow coated the hedges like clean lies. The doorbell rang. She didn't flinch, just rose slowly, set the mug in the sink, and opened the front door to find Rachel Summers standing there, bundled in a charcoal wool coat, her leather briefcase in one hand and a thermos in the other. "I brought the good stuff," Rachel said. "None of that supermarket cinnamon you call tea." Margaret managed a half smile. "Come in. I've got something stronger than tea on the agenda." They sat in the study, the fireplace lit low, casting amber over the oak-paneled walls. Margaret slid the red folder, now thicker than before, across the desk to her friend. Rachel opened it, scanning quickly. As her eyes hit the flagged bank statements, the estate documents, the handwritten ledger Margaret had kept of every misstep and betrayal, her brows tightened. "You're not bluffing," she said. "I never bluff," Margaret replied. "I taught pre-calculus to ninth graders for 3 decades. You learn to spot a manipulator fast. Emily's not even subtle." Rachel leaned back, folding her arms. "You sure about cutting them off entirely?" "It's a nuclear move." Margaret's voice was calm, even soft. "It's justice, and I'm not interested in revenge that makes noise. I want the kind that empties the room and locks the door behind it." Rachel gave a low whistle. "All right then, let's nuke." She opened her laptop and began typing. The clicks of her keyboard filled the room like metronome ticks, each one a beat toward freedom. "Power of attorney?" Rachel asked without looking up. "Transfer it to you," Margaret said. Rachel paused, looking up. "You trust me with that?" "You're the only one left I do trust." Rachel gave a tight nod. "All right. I'll also start the process of rewriting the will, Sophie's trust fund." "Untouchable. Set it up in a separate account. She'll need it after what's coming." Rachel typed faster, the screen reflecting in her glasses. "You've thought this all the way through." Margaret looked out the window again. "They buried my husband 2 years ago. I haven't had anything but time to think." Later that evening, Sophie wandered into the kitchen, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, rubbing at the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Margaret was pouring soup into 2 bowls, the scent of garlic and thyme thick in the air. "Is Dad coming over?" Sophie asked. Margaret didn't look up. "No." "What about Mom?" Still, Margaret said nothing. She placed a bowl in front of Sophie, sat down, and finally met her granddaughter's eyes. "Why not?" Sophie asked again, softer now. Margaret took a deep breath, then exhaled through her nose. "Because some people don't deserve to be at your table, no matter what title they hold in your life." Sophie's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, but she didn't argue. "Did they do something bad?" "They chose themselves," Margaret said, "at my expense." Sophie nodded slowly. "Okay." She picked up her spoon. Margaret felt something lodge in her chest, a wedge of grief, pride, and sadness all twisted together. Sophie didn't press, and that quiet trust hurt more than if she had. Margaret's cell phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She answered. A crisp, professional voice came through. "Mrs. Harris, this is Chloe Reed from First Central. I wanted to inform you that the flagged account under Emily Harris has been frozen as of this afternoon, pending further investigation." Margaret's lips curled faintly. "Thank you, Chloe. Please notify me of any updates." "Of course. Happy holidays." Margaret hung up and turned to Rachel, who had just stepped back into the room with a stack of papers. "Was that what I think it was?" Rachel asked. Margaret nodded. "It's starting." Rachel placed the papers on the table. "You ready to sign?" Margaret uncapped the pen, her fingers steady. "I've been ready since she smiled and called me paranoid." As the pen touched the paper, a heavy thud echoed from the front door, a knock firm and insistent. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Margaret didn't move. Her voice was low, steady. "Let them knock." And again the knock came, louder this time. The glass doors of First Central Bank parted with a soft hiss as Margaret stepped inside, the cold giving way to artificial warmth and polished marble. The space was sterile and quiet, with muted Christmas music drifting overhead like an afterthought. Margaret's boots clicked softly on the tile as she made her way to the reception desk, clutching a sealed manila envelope like it was a scalpel. "Good morning," she said to the young man behind the desk. "I have an appointment with Chloe Reed." The receptionist offered a polite nod. "Yes, Mrs. Harris, she'll be right out." Moments later, Chloe appeared. Tall, composed, wrapped in a steel-gray blazer that matched the seriousness in her eyes. Her smile was quick, professional. "Margaret, come on back." They walked together through the open plan office, past rows of tidy desks and advisors hunched over spreadsheets. Chloe led her into a glass-walled conference room, shutting the door behind them. Margaret set the envelope on the table. "This contains the documentation Rachel and I pulled. Account numbers, transfer dates, signatures. It should be more than enough to confirm what we already know." Chloe's expression remained neutral, though Margaret saw the flicker of discomfort behind her eyes. "I did flag the account last week, as you requested," Chloe said, sitting across from her. "But if what's in there is as serious as you say, the fraud department will escalate it fast." "It is," Margaret said, "and they should." Chloe opened the envelope, sifting through the copies. Her brow furrowed deeper with each page. Some of these transactions are over 6 months old. "Long enough for her to believe she'd gotten away with it," Margaret said softly. She underestimated who she was stealing from. Chloe glanced up, hesitant. "May I ask, why now?" "Why not report this earlier?" Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "Because I was giving my son a chance to notice, to fix it himself. He didn't." Chloe nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her expression. "I'll make sure this moves," she said, quietly but quickly. "Emily won't know what's coming until the department's already on her heels." Margaret gave a single slow nod, eyes calm but cold. She values her image above all else. Let's see how it holds up without foundation. Chloe leaned back, watching her. "You're not doing this out of spite." "No," Margaret said. "This is correction." Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, saw the name David. Chloe noticed the name flash across the screen. "Do you want to take it?" Margaret stared at the phone until it stopped vibrating. "No." She slipped it back into her pocket, unbothered. "He's not calling to apologize. He's calling to make it go away. I'm done cleaning up after his cowardice." Chloe's respect showed in the slight incline of her head. When the meeting ended, Margaret signed the final form with a steady hand. Chloe walked her to the exit, their heels echoing across the marble once more. "Let me know if you hear from her," Margaret said, pausing before the door. "I will. And Margaret?" Chloe's voice lowered. "I hope they understand who they've provoked." Margaret stepped into the cold. They won't. Not until they've lost everything. She didn't head straight home. Instead, she drove across town to the credit union, then to her investment firm, leaving a quiet trail of signatures, updates, and password changes in her wake. Every financial tether that once linked her to David and Emily was severed, clean and silent. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, Rachel's folder open again on her lap, double-checking every clause. She didn't need to, but the act gave her control, a rhythm to replace the ache. Her phone buzzed again. David, then another message. "Mom, please, we need to talk." She turned the phone face down. But just as she reached to switch off the lamp, another message lit the screen, this time from an unknown number. A single sentence. "You think this is over?" A cold rain replaced the snow by the time Margaret pulled into the underground garage beneath Rachel's law office. She preferred this entrance, Less foot traffic, fewer eyes. She parked in a reserved visitor's spot, killed the engine, and sat in the car for a long moment, watching droplets trail down her windshield in slow, dragging lines. She still hadn't replied to the unknown number from the night before. She didn't need to. The silence was the answer. Inside, Rachel greeted her with a nod and a black folder already under her arm. "Conference room B," she said. "Everything's ready." They didn't speak as they walked, the weight of what was coming making small talk feel obscene. Once inside, Rachel shut the door, locked it, and drew the blinds. She laid the folder on the glass table between them. "This is it," she said. "Once you sign, David and Emily are out. Permanently." Margaret slid her reading glasses onto the bridge of her nose and opened the folder. Rachel had color-coded everything. Yellow tabs where signatures were needed, blue for initials. Margaret's eyes skimmed the first page. And Sophie. Her trust fund is locked into a separate entity. It's insulated. Not even Emily's lawyers can touch it. Margaret nodded once. Good. She picked up the pen and signed with quiet precision. First page, second, third. Rachel watched in silence, only breaking it after the final flourish of ink. "You know there'll be blowback," she said. "They'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive." "I know," Margaret replied, placing the pen down neatly. "Let them." Rachel leaned back. "Emily's name has been removed from every estate document. No co-beneficiary claims, no default clauses. It's airtight." "Airtight is what I need." Rachel hesitated. "Do you want me to alert them once this is filed?" Margaret's eyes flicked up. "No, let them feel it first, when the credit cards decline, when the bank calls, when the invitations stop arriving. The paper trail will be their second shock." Rachel didn't argue. Margaret closed the folder and tapped it gently. "I want this filed today." "It will be." As Margaret stood, Rachel handed her a second envelope. "This is Sophie's revised documentation. She won't see any of this until she turns 21, unless you say otherwise." Margaret held it without looking. "She'll be ready before I'm gone." Rachel studied her for a moment. "Where are you headed now?" "My place up in Geneva," Margaret said, pulling on her coat. "It's quiet there, no visitors, no memories." Rachel hesitated. "You sure that's what you want right now?" Margaret gave a small, tired smile. "I've already said everything I needed to say. Now I just want peace." By late afternoon, Margaret was winding through the snow-lined roads outside Lake Geneva, her car humming softly as the city disappeared behind her. Gray trees blurred past in her peripheral vision, their branches skeletal, stripped bare by winter, exactly how she felt, but lighter somehow, hollowed out, not broken. She arrived just before dusk. The house sat on a quiet bend in the road, pine trees hemming it in like silent guards. Inside, everything was as she left it, clean, spare, almost ascetic. No photos, no warmth, just space. She dropped her bag near the fireplace, lit the kindling, and stood watching the flames rise. The quiet wrapped around her like a blanket. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She poured herself a glass of bourbon, sat in the high-backed leather chair, and let her shoulders sink for the first time in days. Then, 3 sharp knocks at the front door. She froze. No one knew she was here. She moved to the hallway, footsteps soundless on the hardwood, peered through the peephole. A man in a dark coat, early 30s, clean-shaven, holding a thin envelope in one hand. He didn't ring the bell. He just knocked again. Softly this time, as if he knew she was standing right there. Margaret opened the door just an inch, the chain still latched. "Can I help you?" He held up the envelope. "You've been served." Margaret's eyes narrowed. He smiled faintly. "Emily Harris is filing a preemptive suit, claims emotional distress, financial sabotage." Margaret stared at the envelope for a long beat. Then, "Let her come." Emily always curated her life like a storefront window, flawless, backlit, and impossible to touch. So it wasn't surprising when just 2 days after Margaret was served at her Geneva retreat, a glowing post appeared on Emily's Instagram. The photo showed a cozy living room scene, soft focus Christmas lights, a mug of cocoa cradled in manicured hands, and a caption that read, "Family isn't always easy, but healing is worth fighting for. Grateful for forgiveness, for love, and for second chances." Family first. Holiday healing. It racked up over 12,000 likes in 2 hours. But it wasn't the likes that mattered. It was the comments. "Is this about what happened with your MIL? Thought you said she was unstable. Wait, didn't she accuse you of stealing? This feels fake. Still waiting on that explanation, Emily." The mask was cracking, and the public, sensing blood beneath the gloss, started digging. Margaret saw the post early the next morning, sipping coffee on her screened-in porch, a throw blanket tucked around her shoulders. She didn't blink. Instead, she picked up her phone and tapped out a message with the same precision she once used correcting test papers. Her post was a single sentence typed over a black background. "Family ties mean nothing when the knife is still in your back." No tags, no names, no hashtags. It went live at 7:12 a.m. By 8:43, it had been shared over 9,000 times. By noon, local news had picked it up. Rachel texted her with just 3 words. "You broke the internet." That afternoon, the calls started. Margaret didn't answer the first one, or the second. But the third, David, she picked up. "Mom," he said without greeting, "what the hell are you doing?" Margaret stared out at the lake. "Just speaking the truth. It's overdue." "You're humiliating her. You're humiliating us. Do you have any idea what people are saying online?" "I'm not responsible for what people say. I'm responsible for what I endured and what I won't tolerate anymore." "She's your family." Margaret's voice was cold steel. "So was I. You made your choice." David's silence stretched, then weaker. "She's hurting." "She can afford to," Margaret said. "Let her use one of her sponsorship deals to buy a better conscience." She hung up. Within hours, Emily's carefully curated facade began to unravel. A lifestyle brand quietly deleted her promotional post. A boutique candle company removed her affiliate link. Her name, once associated with relatable elegance, was now trending alongside words like fraud, manipulation, and trust fund scandal. Emily tried to regain control, posting a series of Instagram stories. Tears, filtered grief, vague references to being misunderstood. But the internet had tasted authenticity, and they could smell the synthetic on her like too much perfume. By nightfall, Margaret sat by the fire, her phone lighting up with hundreds of messages. Most were from strangers. Some offered support. Others shared stories of betrayal. A few asked if she'd go public, speak out, write something longer. But one message stood out. It was from Sophie. Just 2 words. "Thank you." Margaret stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Then slowly, a new message appeared beneath it, from an unknown number. "You started a war. Be ready." Emily's damage control came dressed in a cream pantsuit and a $400 an hour PR handler named Camden Chase. He was young, aggressive, and already crafting a redemption arc before Emily finished her 3rd overpriced green juice. "She's your mother-in-law, not a monster," Camden said smoothly as he paced Emily's home office. "We shaped the narrative. You're the victim of a smear campaign by a mentally unstable relative. It's bold, it's sympathetic, it sells." Emily didn't blink. Her once effortless charm had curdled into something sharper, hungrier. "Make them believe it," she said. Hours later, a polished video hit her Instagram feed. A softly lit Emily, sitting on a beige couch, tearfully recounting a long, painful history of misunderstandings with Margaret. She spoke about trying to forgive, about being targeted, about love and family and how social media didn't show the whole story. The video garnered 200,000 views in 6 hours. But this time, the comments didn't fall in line. Why is everything always someone else's fault? Crocodile tears. You still haven't addressed the money. Nice lighting, but we're not buying it. David called Margaret the next morning. Mom, please, enough. You've made your point. Just stop. Margaret stood at her lakefront kitchen window, watching the morning fog roll over the water. I haven't even started. She's not handling this well. She's unraveling. She should have unraveled before dipping into my accounts. She's my wife. And I'm your mother. There was a pause on the line, thick and trembling. I didn't know it would go this far, he whispered. You didn't want to know, Margaret said, then ended the call. That evening, she met Rachel at a boutique hotel in downtown Chicago. Cameras, reporters, and a podium had been arranged in the ballroom. Margaret wore black, elegant, stark. Her makeup was minimal, but her voice carried like a blade through silk when she stepped to the mic. This isn't about bitterness, she began. It's about truth. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. In just under 6 minutes, she delivered a calm, devastating account of the betrayal she'd uncovered, the transfers, the gaslighting, the deflection. She never once named Emily, but she didn't have to. The world already knew. The story hit the evening news. By midnight, it had spread to national platforms. Back at her apartment, Emily hurled a tumbler across the kitchen. It exploded against the backsplash. David tried to speak, but she cut him off. She ambushed me. She ambushed us. No, David said softly. She just finally stopped covering for us. Emily glared at him. You're taking her side now? I'm tired, Emily. Her voice was venom. You think this is over? You think I'm going to let her ruin everything we've built? He didn't answer. Meanwhile, Rachel sat beside Margaret on the hotel balcony, 2 glasses of wine between them, both untouched. That press conference crossed a line, Rachel warned. If she files a countersuit for defamation, let her try, Margaret said. She'll have to prove something's false. Rachel studied her. You're not worried? Margaret turned to her, gaze steady. I'm done playing defense. Below them, the city buzzed with life. Sirens, horns, the hum of 1,000 conversations. But up on the 12th floor, it was still. Margaret leaned back in her chair and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Across the city, Emily was sitting alone in the dark, her phone screen glowing as she watched her sponsorship deals vanish one by one. She opened a new message thread. No name saved, just a number she knew by heart. She's winning. Fix this. The response came 3 dots, then 1 line. We'll make it personal. Margaret's morning began the same way it had for weeks now. Quiet lake water, a strong cup of coffee, and a silence so absolute it felt like armor. She sat on the porch in her thick wool robe, a spiral-bound notebook open on her lap. Half thoughts, half plans. She hadn't decided which yet. Her phone buzzed once beside her, then again, then again. 3 rapid pings in a row. An alert tone she didn't recognize. An old email account she rarely checked anymore. She tapped the screen. Subject, you've gone too far. It was from Emily. No greeting, no preamble, just venom, poured out in blocky paragraphs. You've humiliated me publicly, destroyed my professional standing, and painted yourself as some tragic matriarch while you tear apart your own family. You're sick. You're bitter. You want control, not justice. And I won't sit here and let you rewrite history just because you're old and lonely. You're not the victim. You're just louder. If you keep this up, I'll drag every skeleton you've got into daylight. I know things, Margaret. Things about you. You don't get to win. At the bottom, a signature line still linked to her influencer brand. Emily Harris, Lifestyle Curator. Wellness, Style, Purpose, TM. Margaret didn't flinch. She read the message twice, then calmly forwarded it to Rachel. Subject, for legal review. No response. Body, let her hang herself. She stood, walked back inside, and made herself another cup of coffee, this time adding cream. She was in no rush. By mid-morning, Rachel replied, Understood. This kind of direct threat undermines any emotional distress claim. I'll draft a formal cease and desist just in case, but honestly? Letting her talk is our best defense. Margaret's phone rang an hour later. David. She ignored it. It rang again, then a text. Please, just hear me out. I didn't know she sent that. Another buzz, another message. She's spiraling. I'm trying to fix it. Please, Mom. Margaret stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then she set it down again, untouched. There was nothing left to fix. By late afternoon, the storm had shifted online. Screenshots of Emily's email had somehow leaked. An anonymous source had submitted them to a blog that specialized in influencer scandals. The story exploded. Twitter lit up with side-by-side screenshots, Margaret's black background quote, posts next to Emily's frantic, entitled tirade. The contrast stung. Even her supporters began to scatter. We defended this woman? Yikes. That signature block is chilling. She really tried to weaponize the lonely old woman stereotype and failed. Emily's fan pages started going dark. Her follower count dropped in real time. David called again. Margaret still didn't pick up. That night, her landline rang. An oddity. Almost no one had the number. Margaret answered, her voice calm. Hello? There was a pause, then a man's voice, polished, cautious. Mrs. Harris, my name is Bryce Langston. I represent several media outlets, Opal Digital, Morning West, and the Chicago Evening Wire. We're preparing a multi-part piece on elder financial abuse, family betrayal, and image laundering. Margaret said nothing. We'd like to center your story, with your permission, on your terms. Margaret's eyes drifted to the fire. Her own reflection flickered faintly in the window. I'll think about it, she said. One more thing, Bryce added. I'm not supposed to say this, but someone from Emily's PR team leaked the email. Margaret blinked. Why? Because they don't want to go down with her. After she hung up, Margaret sat in the dark for a long time. Then she opened her old notebook, and for the first time she began writing from the beginning. Not a plan, but a story. One she intended the world to read. Half an hour later, her phone buzzed once more. A new message. From an unrecognized number. Just 4 words. You've made her desperate. The snow had melted by the time Margaret saw the first photo. Emily in a designer dress sitting at a cafe, her phone held at just the right angle to cast the sunlight over her features. The caption read, taking time to focus on what really matters. Thankful for the moments of peace. Grateful. But there was something off about the picture, the strained smile, the too perfect posture, the way her eyes didn't quite meet the camera. Margaret had lived with people like Emily long enough to spot a lie from a mile away. This wasn't peace. This was an attempt to build a wall around a crumbling empire. And the cracks were starting to show. Within hours, more photos began circulating. One from a private event where Emily, oblivious to the camera, had been caught sneering at a waiter who had accidentally spilled a drink on her dress. Another, a video, shaky but unmistakable, of her arguing with a photographer, her voice rising in anger. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. But the most damning one, an old Instagram story from a sponsored post showing Emily posing in a high-end boutique, was the one that really cut through. In the background, a man could be seen handing Emily an envelope, its contents still unknown, but its implications clear. The caption, now deleted, had read, "Grateful for the opportunities that keep coming my way." The comments rolled in faster than Emily could delete them. What are you really being paid for, Emily? How much did they pay you to pretend like you didn't know you were stealing? No more sympathy for this one. By midday, Emily's name was being whispered in the same breath as terms like scam and influencer fraud. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, phone on silent, watching the storm unfold from the comfort of her quiet retreat. She poured herself another cup of coffee, noting how little the chaos seemed to affect her. All she had done was expose the truth. She had nothing to prove to the world. They were doing the work for her. At noon, her phone buzzed. Again. This time, it was David. She almost didn't pick up, but she did. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "this has gone too far." Margaret stared at the phone. "Has it?" "I can't even run my business anymore. Everyone's connected Emily to me, and it's suffocating. I'm losing clients. No one wants to be seen with me. People are making assumptions about me because of what she's done." "And whose fault is that, David?" Margaret's voice was steady, unwavering. "You chose her over me. You allowed her to drag you into this. Now you're paying the price." He stopped, his voice breaking. "I didn't know it would turn out like this. She's my wife, Mom." Margaret's grip tightened on the edge of the table. "And I'm your mother. You never once asked if I was okay. You never asked if I was being honest." She let the silence hang between them for a long moment. Finally, she spoke again. "Don't call me again, David. Not until you figure out which side you're on." The line went dead. She let out a breath, slowly, deliberately. Her phone buzzed again. Sophie. "Grandma, when will Mom and Dad come visit? They haven't come by in forever." Her voice was small, innocent. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of it all settling in her chest. She had shielded Sophie from the chaos as best as she could, but this was inevitable. "They're not coming, sweetheart," she said quietly. Her voice softening as she looked out the window at the horizon, where the sky and water blurred together in gray. "Some people don't deserve a second chance." Sophie's voice trembled. "I miss them." Margaret held the phone tighter, her heart heavy but resolute. "I know, darling, but you'll be okay. I'll make sure of it." The phone fell silent and Margaret sat back in her chair. The storm outside the window had passed, but a storm inside felt far from over. She knew Emily would try to regroup. She always did. But this time, Margaret wasn't just watching from the sidelines. She was shaping the story. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Mrs. Harris, this is Bryce Langston," came the voice on the other end. "I represent several media outlets, including Opal Digital and Morning West. We're interested in featuring your side of the story. We think it's time the public knew everything about what Emily's been hiding." Margaret felt a cold smile spread across her face. "Let's make it public," she said quietly, "but on my terms." As she ended the call, she glanced at the window again. Silent, still, but not for long. The war was just beginning. The day Margaret received her remission letter from the doctor, the sun was bright and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows on the freshly fallen leaves outside her home. Her world, for the first time in years, felt less like a battlefield and more like a new beginning. She had fought this battle silently, not seeking sympathy, not expecting praise. But now, as she stood alone in her kitchen, reading the confirmation that her cancer was in remission, she felt the weight of it lift from her shoulders. She had won, and yet, even in this moment of personal triumph, she couldn't help but feel the sting of the hollow victory. Emily and David hadn't even acknowledged it. Their world was unraveling, and they couldn't find the time to care about her recovery, her survival. Emily's PR team was still working overtime, trying to rewrite the narrative, while David's business floundered under the weight of association. The silence from them was deafening. Margaret placed the letter on the counter and reached for the phone. She had already spoken with Rachel this morning, asking her to revise the will. It was time to tighten the conditions on Sophie's inheritance. No more access unless the girl had proven herself capable of independence. Sophie deserved the future Margaret had planned for her. Not the broken legacy of David and Emily. The will was nothing more than a formality now. Emily and David had made their choices. Margaret had made hers. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret sat at her dining table surrounded by a small group of close friends. Rachel was there, of course, and so was Chloe, the bank manager who had become an unexpected ally. The laughter was quiet, sincere, the kind of laughter that came when the world outside was too loud. "Here's to you, Margaret." Rachel raised her glass. "A warrior, a mother, and a survivor." Margaret smiled softly, meeting each of their eyes, feeling the love that surrounded her in that moment. It was the only celebration she needed. No grand speeches, no promises from a son who never fully understood, no pretenses, just the truth of her survival. But as the evening wore on, Margaret's phone buzzed, drawing her attention. A notification from a media outlet. A piece had gone live. Emily's latest crisis, the scandals growing, were now front-page news. The headline screamed, "The influence of deceit, how Emily Harris used her image for profit and power." The accompanying article detailed the stories, the leaks, the misused funds, all tied to Emily's public image, all caught in the glare of public scrutiny. Emily's carefully curated world was being torn apart, and there was no control left. Margaret knew Emily would fight harder now, but she wasn't sure it would make any difference. The media had tasted blood, and it was circling. The noise of the evening faded as Margaret read the piece, feeling a strange, detached satisfaction. Her revenge, her story, was now public. She hadn't forced it. Emily had given it to her. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sophie stood in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and concern. "Grandma," she said softly, walking into the room and handing her the flowers. "I'm so proud of you. You're the strongest person I know." Margaret's heart clenched as she took the flowers, inhaling their fresh, familiar scent. She'd never needed to hear this from anyone, but from Sophie, her granddaughter who had only just begun to understand. Her words hit deeper than she'd expected. "Thank you, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, holding Sophie close. "You're my strength now." Sophie smiled up at her, eyes full of love and loyalty. Margaret reached into her drawer and pulled out a small envelope. The one she had prepared earlier. She handed it to Sophie. "This is for you, when you're ready." Sophie's eyes flickered between the envelope and her grandmother's face, sensing the weight of the moment. Margaret didn't need to explain. Sophie would know when the time came. The phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. Margaret glanced down at the message. It was from Bryce Langston, the journalist. "The story's going live tomorrow. Emily's team is desperate. This won't end quietly." Margaret set the phone down, looking across the room at Sophie. She had no illusions left about the battle ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And then a new message pinged on her phone. "We're coming for you." It had been a week since the media storm reached its peak, and the ripples were still moving through Margaret's world, though she could feel the tide turning in her favor. Emily and David were scrambling, hiring lawyers, drafting cease and desist letters, trying to convince anyone who would listen that this was all a misunderstanding. But their efforts felt hollow, like whispers in a gale. Margaret sat in her study, surrounded by papers, her legal documents now meticulously organized. Rachel had been her steady guide through this whole process, assuring her that every step they'd taken was sound. But the weight of the situation still sat heavy in her chest. Emily and David had their own lives to destroy, but Margaret's life, her legacy, was something she would guard with every breath in her body. Rachel had warned her of the risks. A defamation suit from Emily was still possible. The fraud investigation could drag on, exposing deeper layers of corruption. But for the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel like she was fighting an uphill battle. She was at the top, looking down, and she wasn't going to lose her footing. The doorbell rang, breaking her concentration. She set the papers aside and walked through the house, the click of her shoes echoing in the empty hallway. She opened the door to find Chloe Reed standing there, a tired smile on her face. "Hi, Margaret," Chloe said, holding out a box wrapped in brown paper. I thought you could use a little something to take your mind off things. Margaret took the package, smiling faintly. Thank you, Chloe. You didn't have to. I know, but I thought maybe a distraction was what you needed, Chloe said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. How's the media circus treating you? It's settling down, Margaret replied, her voice calm but firm. But I'm still watching. Chloe's gaze shifted to the window, the light filtering in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. You're holding steady. I respect that. But David and Emily, they've started to isolate themselves. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Isolate? David's business is in free fall, Chloe continued. He's losing clients. People are pulling away from him because of Emily's scandal. And Emily, she's been dropped by her sponsors. Her social media following is shrinking. Their circle is getting smaller every day. Margaret nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction, but also something more complex. Pity, maybe. But Emily had made her choices. Now Margaret was merely watching the consequences unfold. Later that evening, Margaret held a small family gathering at her home. It wasn't the kind of event she used to host, crowded, full of noise and feigned cheer. This time it was intimate, quiet. Only a few of her closest friends, including Rachel and Chloe, had been invited. Sophie, too, sat at the table, her quiet presence filling the space in a way Margaret hadn't expected. David and Emily were conspicuously absent, their absence hanging in the air like an unsaid word. Margaret didn't need them there. She never had. Sophie, as she sat next to her grandmother, looked up at her with a question in her eyes. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "are you still angry with Mom and Dad?" Margaret's fingers tightened around her wine glass. She felt the weight of the question, the innocence in Sophie's voice. "I'm angry at their betrayal," Margaret said, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "But I'm proud of the truth that came out." Sophie didn't reply, but her gaze softened, her understanding clear. She was starting to see the pieces of the puzzle, even at her young age. Just as the conversation shifted to other matters, Margaret's phone buzzed from across the table. She glanced at it briefly. Another message. This one was from an unrecognized number. The message read, "You think you've won? We're coming for you. You haven't seen the worst of it yet." Margaret's heart skipped a beat, but her face remained unreadable. The storm outside her home had subsided. But she knew this was far from over. It had only just begun. With a slow breath, she set the phone down and met Sophie's eyes. "There's more to come," she said softly, the quiet certainty in her tone carrying an unspoken promise. The phone buzzed again, this time with a new email notification. Margaret was sitting at her desk, staring out the window, the wind whipping through the bare branches of the trees outside. It had been days since she last heard from David or Emily. In fact, she'd been expecting this moment, the moment when the silence would break and the inevitable apologies would come. She clicked open the message from David. Subject, "I'm sorry?" The email was short, more desperate than she had expected. The words were carefully chosen, but beneath the surface, Margaret could see the rawness, the need for forgiveness. "Mom, I don't even know where to begin. I'm so sorry. I've made so many mistakes, and I can't undo what I've done. I see now how wrong I was, how blind I was to what Emily was doing. I should have been there for you. I should have trusted you. I was weak. Please, I need you to forgive me. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to. Please." It was a familiar tone, a tone that Margaret had heard before when David needed her to fix things for him, when he wanted to be absolved of his mistakes without truly facing the consequences. Margaret set her phone down, her fingers still resting on the screen as she sat back in her chair. The silence in the room felt like an answer in itself. Her gaze flicked to the other unread email notification from Emily, and a deep, almost detached calm washed over her. She opened it without hesitation. Subject, "I need you to understand." Emily's email was a stark contrast to David's. The words flowed in a manipulative rhythm, a blend of feigned vulnerability and sharp accusations, all wrapped in a glossy veneer of self-justification. Margaret, I've tried to be patient with you. I've tried to be understanding, but what you're doing to us, to our family, is cruel. Yes, I made mistakes, but we all make mistakes, don't we? I was hurt, I was confused, and you know what? I still am, but that doesn't mean I deserve to be treated like this. You've humiliated me in front of the whole world, and now you expect me to accept that as justice? This isn't over. I won't let it be. It was typical Emily, twisting the narrative to center herself, demanding sympathy while deflecting any accountability. Margaret didn't need to read it all to know where it was going. The accusations, the gaslighting, the manipulation. It was all there, buried beneath the surface. Emily was never going to take responsibility. Margaret read both emails once more, each word sinking deeper into her. But after a long moment of silence, she set her phone aside again. She didn't need to respond. She wasn't looking for closure. She wasn't going to let them back in. They had made their choices. Rachel's voice echoed in her mind, a steady, calm reminder. Don't reply. Don't give them the power to pull you back in. Stand firm. Margaret picked up the pen on her desk, the weight of it grounding her. She reached for a blank sheet of paper, letting her hand hover above it. She didn't need to pour out her heart or attempt to explain herself. She'd done that long ago. No more words, only truth. Her pen moved slowly, the ink leaving a single line across the page. You lost me the moment you chose her over me. The words felt like a release. Final. Definite. Margaret set the pen down and folded the paper neatly, her gaze drifting to the window again. The wind had settled, but a storm still brewed inside her. Her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Sophie. I'm not going to protect them anymore, Grandma. Margaret's chest tightened, a strange ache blooming there as she read the words. She had known Sophie was watching, knew her granddaughter was quietly processing the world in her own way. But hearing it, seeing Sophie finally speak her truth, it was both heartbreaking and liberating. Margaret placed her phone on the desk and leaned back in her chair. The world was changing around her, but Sophie's decision was the one that truly mattered. The storm outside had passed, but there was something else on the horizon, something darker, something more real. Margaret was ready, and the game was about to change. The day Margaret submitted the final pieces of evidence to the authorities, she did so with a calm, unwavering resolve. She had seen enough. She had gathered every shred of proof, every transfer, every email, every invoice, and now she was handing it over, not for justice, but for truth. She knew the wheels of the law would turn slowly, but in her mind, they had already begun. She sat at her desk, the envelope heavy in her hands, staring at the seal as if it were the last barrier between her and the truth. She had been careful, every step calculated. Now, there was no turning back. Emily's world was about to shatter under the weight of her own actions, and Margaret wasn't going to be the one to catch the pieces. As the day wore on, Margaret allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The phone calls and the texts had quieted down. The media buzzed, but it was a dull hum now. Emily's carefully constructed image was falling apart. Every scandal, every lie was beginning to surface. And then the letter arrived. It was from Ruth, an old friend from Margaret's teaching days, someone who had known her since before David was born. Margaret opened the envelope slowly, unsure what she would find. The letter was handwritten in Ruth's neat looping script. Dear Margaret, I can't express how proud I am of you. I know this hasn't been easy, and I know you've been through more than your fair share of betrayal. But what you've done, standing up for the truth, even when it costs you everything, takes real courage. You are a woman of integrity, and your strength will be remembered, even if not everyone understands it now. Keep going. You've made the right choice. I'm with you, always. Margaret held the letter to her chest, letting the warmth of Ruth's words wash over her. She didn't need many people's approval, never had, but knowing that Ruth, someone who had seen her through so much, understood the depth of what she was doing, meant more than she could say. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was David. She had been waiting for this moment. The one where he would finally admit to the truth, where he would acknowledge the damage he had done. He had never been able to stand on his own, but maybe now, after everything had unraveled, he would finally see the reality of his choices. "Mom," David's voice cracked through the line, I've been talking to a friend, and I regret everything. I'm sorry. I should never have sided with her. I never should have let things get this far." Margaret closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She had heard this before, but now there was something different in his voice. It wasn't guilt, it was regret. "I know, David," she said softly, her voice betraying none of the anger that still simmered just beneath the surface. "But you made your choice." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "I don't know what to do, Mom. It feels like everything's falling apart." Margaret felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe sympathy, but she buried it quickly. There was nothing left to save him. "You'll figure it out," she said, her tone calm but final. "But this isn't about you anymore." She hung up before he could say anything else, the weight of the moment settling around her like a blanket. Her eyes drifted to Sophie, who had been watching her from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Grandma," Sophie said softly, walking into the room, "I'm done with them. I don't want to protect them anymore." Margaret felt her chest tighten. She had known this day was coming. Sophie had been caught in the middle for so long. But now she was making her own choice. "I understand, sweetheart," Margaret replied, her voice soft with the weight of it all. "You don't have to protect anyone anymore. Not them. Not anyone." Sophie's eyes met hers, filled with a quiet strength. "I'm proud of you, Grandma, and I'm not going to let them hurt me anymore." Margaret smiled, a bittersweet pride blooming in her chest. Sophie had grown stronger than she could have imagined. Just as she was about to speak again, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a notification from the news. Breaking. Emily Harris under investigation for financial fraud. Authorities launch full investigation into her actions after allegations of misconduct. More details to come. Margaret set the phone down slowly, her lips curling into a faint smile. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. Emily's world had come crashing down, and Margaret had been the one to bring it to the light. The phone call from Rachel was brief but poignant. "It's official. They've been charged." Margaret sat back in her chair, the weight of the news settling over her. It was over. Finally, after months of quiet plotting and planning, the scales had tipped. Emily and David were facing the consequences of their actions, and there was no way to undo what had been done. It wasn't victory. Victory would have been simpler, cleaner. This was justice, slow and imperfect, but undeniable. Margaret hadn't expected a sense of triumph. What she felt was more complex, a quiet relief, a sorrowful satisfaction that came with the confirmation of everything she had already known. Later that afternoon, Sophie arrived, a wide smile on her face as she handed Margaret a letter. "Grandma, I got in." Sophie's voice trembled with excitement. "The scholarship. It's from the school you've always wanted me to attend. She broke off, her eyes bright. Margaret held the letter in her hands, reading the words, the weight of it sinking in. Sophie was going to have the future Margaret had always envisioned for her, one untainted by the mistakes of the past. Sophie's path would not be dictated by her parents' failures. Margaret had seen to that. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Margaret said softly, pulling Sophie into a tight embrace. "You've earned this, all of it." Sophie pulled back slightly, her eyes still sparkling. "It's all because of you, Grandma. I wouldn't be here without you. The emotions that welled up inside Margaret were overwhelming. But she pressed them down. This wasn't about her, it was about Sophie, about ensuring her granddaughter could move forward without the shadows of betrayal hanging over her. Later that week, Margaret stood in front of a crowded auditorium, the applause echoing in her ears, a public award for courage in the face of adversity, a recognition that she had never sought but was now given to her nonetheless. As she accepted the trophy, she glanced around the room at the people who had seen her journey from the very beginning. She couldn't help but think of Emily and David. They had no place here, no reason to be part of this celebration. Their absence was a louder statement than any applause could be. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice steady. "I accept this on behalf of all the people who have been wronged, for all those who have had their integrity questioned by others. We may not always get the recognition we deserve, but we know who we are." Afterward, as Margaret left the event, Rachel called again. "Did you see the interview?" Rachel asked. Margaret hadn't yet, but now she found a quiet corner in the lobby and pulled it up on her phone. The interview was everywhere. The media had taken note of the scandal, and now Emily's name was all but tarnished beyond repair. Every truth that had been hidden in the shadows was now fully exposed, and the world was turning its gaze on her. Sophie's scholarship, the recognition Margaret had just received, and the unfolding chaos around Emily, everything had changed. Margaret felt herself standing at the edge of something new, something she had fought for. But as the media continued to cover the scandal, and as the truth about Emily's actions spread further, Margaret's resolve only strengthened. She would leave. The home she had known, the life she had built with David and Emily, those memories were suffocating her now. It was time for a new chapter, time to rebuild her life with Sophie, free from the shadows of betrayal. The next day, Margaret took a final look around her home. There was no emotional farewell, just the weight of finality in the air. As she walked down the hallway one last time, Sophie by her side, she realized the most important truth of all. She had survived, and nothing would break her again. Margaret stood at the window of her new home, watching the sunlight filter through the trees in the front yard. It was quiet here, peaceful, far from the chaos she had left behind. This house was different, more modest than the one she had shared with David and Emily, but it felt like freedom. The walls held no memories of betrayal, no echoes of promises broken. Here, the only thing that mattered was what she chose to bring with her. She had left behind the grandeur, the pretense of a life that wasn't hers anymore. Now, the only people around her were those who truly cared. Friends like Rachel, Chloe, and Sophie, the ones who had stood by her in the darkness and celebrated her victories, no matter how small. Sophie had settled in easily. Margaret watched her granddaughter blossom in this new environment, away from the tension, away from the guilt that had once plagued their lives. Sophie was thriving academically, and Margaret had seen a shift in her, a quiet strength that had always been there but had been buried beneath the weight of her parents' mistakes. At dinner one evening, Sophie smiled across the table at Margaret. "I feel like I can finally breathe here, like there's nothing holding me back." Margaret smiled back, a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest. "You deserve to breathe freely, Sophie, and no one is going to take that from you." The phone rang, pulling Margaret from her thoughts. It was a lawyer, one she hadn't spoken to in weeks. She hesitated before answering, sensing the familiar dread creep up her spine. "Mrs. Harris," the lawyer said in a calm, professional tone, "I wanted to inform you that Emily has made one last attempt to legally challenge you. She's seeking to overturn the will changes and has filed for a restraining order." Margaret listened, the weight of the words sinking in slowly. She had expected this. Emily would never give up, would never accept the reality of her actions. But Margaret was no longer afraid. She was no longer the woman who had hesitated in the face of confrontation. "Let her try," Margaret said with a quiet, resolute calm. "I'm not worried." The lawyer paused, surprised by the confidence in her voice. "Understood. I'll keep you informed of any developments." Margaret hung up and set the phone down on the counter, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The storm was over, but Emily's desperation was far from finished. It didn't matter. Margaret had found peace, something that no legal battle could take away. Later that year, Margaret sat down at her new desk, the same one she had used for decades as a teacher. But this time, it wasn't papers or lesson plans in front of her. It was her own story. She had decided to write a memoir, a record of her journey, her survival, the betrayal she had endured, and the strength it took to reclaim her life. The words flowed easily, the ink catching up to the emotions that had been bottled up for so long. She wrote about the darkness, the anger, and the quiet moments of clarity that had led her to this point. But above all, she wrote about the triumph of truth and the power of choosing yourself. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sophie entered, holding a letter in her hands. "It's for you, Grandma." "From the publisher," Sophie said, her eyes wide with excitement. Margaret opened it slowly, reading the first line of the letter aloud. "We'd be honored to publish your memoir." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this kind of recognition, but the warmth of it was undeniable. Sophie smiled as if she knew the weight of that moment. "This is just the beginning, Grandma," Sophie said, sitting down beside her. Margaret nodded, her eyes fixed on the letter. She had done it. She had taken back control of her life piece by piece. The world had tried to break her, but she had only become stronger. As she looked out the window again, the sky darkening with the onset of evening, she realized that the truth was now part of her. It would always be with her, in every step she took from here on out. But she was no longer the woman who had been wronged. She was the woman who had rebuilt herself, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The phone buzzed again, but this time she ignored it. The past was gone. She had nothing left to prove. She had everything she needed now. Months passed, and the quiet life Margaret had built in her new home felt like the calm after a storm. Serene, but never complacent. Her memoir, The Life I Chose, had become a bestseller, its raw honesty touching the hearts of people she would never meet. She was invited to speak at conferences, on podcasts, and at events where survivors of betrayal, those who had suffered in silence, like her, came forward to share their stories. In every audience, Margaret saw herself, broken, afraid, but ultimately unbowed. At one of her talks, a woman in the front row stood up. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking, but there was strength in her words. "I thought I was the only one," she said, looking directly at Margaret. "Your book gave me the courage to leave. I thought it would break me, but I'm still here. I don't know how to thank you." Margaret's chest tightened as she looked back at the woman, the words she had written on paper now echoing in the world. "This is why I did it," she thought. "This is the purpose I had been searching for." As her story spread, more letters arrived. Letters from women who had been abandoned by family, by people they loved, and who had now found a way to reclaim themselves. Each letter was a testament to the courage Margaret had inspired, to the healing she had sparked, and it humbled her. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Claire, whose name Margaret had never heard before. Claire's story mirrored her own. Betrayed by a daughter-in-law, alienated from her son. Claire wrote that she had spent years burying her pain, but after reading Margaret's story, she found the courage to confront her own family, to finally choose herself. Margaret had not expected to have such an impact. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but now she understood. This is what strength looks like. It's in the telling of the truth, even when it's painful. Her phone buzzed late one evening as she sat by the fire. It was Sophie, her voice quiet but certain on the other end. "Grandma," Sophie began, "I've been thinking about something. I want to start a foundation for young women, for those who've been hurt by toxic family dynamics. I want to help them heal the way you helped me." Margaret's heart swelled with pride. She had watched Sophie grow from a girl unsure of her place in the world to a woman filled with purpose. "That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart," Margaret replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You've got everything you need to make it happen." Sophie's voice softened, determination lacing her words. "I want to fund it through your estate. It's time for you to leave a legacy that can help others." Margaret felt the weight of Sophie's words, a new chapter unfolding before them. The thought of Sophie creating something that would continue to help others in her name filled Margaret with a quiet joy. Sophie had learned from her, not just about survival, but about how to create something meaningful out of the ashes. As she sat back, her hand resting on the arm of the chair, Margaret allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Emily's name had become a whisper, forgotten in the wake of her own strength. No one remembered the woman who had tried to tear their family apart. Emily's sponsors had pulled away. Her once glamorous social media presence faded into obscurity. And David? His apologies were long past, his guilt a fading echo. Margaret had won her peace, and in the process had created a ripple of healing that would carry forward for generations. With Sophie's foundation taking shape, Margaret knew that her legacy would never be one of bitterness or resentment. It would be a legacy of strength, of resilience, and of choosing yourself, no matter the cost. As Margaret looked out the window that evening, the sky painted with the last light of the setting sun, she realized the truth she had been living all along. She had never been broken. She had only been waiting for the right moment to rebuild herself, to rebuild her life. And now, it was time for the world to see that life for what it truly was, a life reclaimed.